Once Upon a Time in the West was very clearly a big influence on both Red Dead Redemption and Westworld. In one way was this theme of redemption, right? So in Once Upon a Time in the West, there's, basically it's the West is this horrible place where all these horrible things happen, and the main characters have to redeem themselves after basically murdering each other. And this is basically what happens in Red Dead Redemption as well. John Marston is this guy with this really bad past as a gang member. He's killed a lot of people. He's trying to get past that with the help of the federal government, strangely enough. And they just want him to capture or kill these other two guys, and his slate will be wiped clean, and he can live a happy life with his wife and son, right? So he keeps talking about that. I just want to live a good life. I'm trying to be a good person. In Westworld, it's similar, but it's not all the characters, but there is a lot of stuff, a lot of talk about memory in Westworld, and I think Tamara's going to talk more about that. But just to touch on it, the characters, especially Teddy in Westworld, has this past, and he keeps saying it's almost like a lot of what happens at Westworld is funny because it's a backstory that's been written for the robots, right? So you're kind of following it along, but every time you hear it, the first few times you hear it, you're thinking, God, this is really hackneyed and corny. But then you start thinking, well, it's actually a script that's been written for these robots to say, and they keep going in these loops, right? So with Teddy, his past, you don't know for a long time. And they just kind of keep referring to it as his, quote, mysterious background. But he does talk about, I've got some reckoning to do before I can be with you, Dolores, who's the woman he's in love with. So anyway, this is a theme that kind of comes and goes in most Wild West stories. Part of that, I think, is the fact that in the Wild West, the myth of the Wild West, there's the possibility of recreating oneself, of getting away from this horrible past you've had. It's kind of tied to the gold rush, right? You're creating yourself financially, you're remaking your life, transformative power of wealth. But there's also like this personal anonymity that you have when you're in this new country, a brand new place, where you can go off into the countryside and nobody knows who you are, what your past is, and you remake yourself, right? So this is kind of key to my understanding of Westworld and Red Dead Redemption, because for me it all comes down to, or at least the thing I love about Westworld as a series, it's kind of problematic, right? There's some parts in it that are, it's long-winded. There's a lot of stuff that they throw in there in the first season that's kind of ancillary and just kind of distracts you a bit. But the core of it to me is really the way that the host being the name for the robots, right? The hosts, in the way that they live, and they keep acting out these loops, right, day to day, and you keep seeing these loops reenacted, and I think that affects most human beings in a kind of profound way, because all of us are familiar with that, right? We have these loops that we've lived. I mean, from the mundane, like let's say just getting up in the morning, eating meals at a certain time, coming home, going to sleep, etc., to more horrific loops or things that are problematic, like addiction and gambling and whatever, right? Things like that can actually ruin lives. So I think we're all kind of familiar.
Displays aren't, so.
Okay. The display's not what?
I just don't know the correct
the
proper resolution. I think the text said it was 1280 by 1200 by 800. So
1280 by 800. No,
yeah, I don't have that, but
okay.
I
Well, just try one and see if it plays while I'm. Sorry. So I'll continue while we're doing this. So to me, that's kind of like, it's all about these tightly wound pathologies of everyday life that we all have and we're all familiar with. And it kind of hits home for most humans. Even when we're watching Westworld, it's entertaining and it's weird, but I think that aspect of it is something that the creators, Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, really wanted to foreground and show it in an interesting way. And they're doing that with these hosts. And as video game players, right, we all have familiarity with this, with loops as well, with NPCs in particular, right? It's very common for you to see NPCs doing loops. Often they're broken loops in video games, especially in Rockstar games, where they're hugely open worlds and they really can't predict what anybody's going to do in that world. So the loops often get broken and messed up, and somebody will say something that's, one of the NPCs will say something that's completely out of context, or things, they'll run into walls and their where, all kinds of fun things happen. So I immediately saw a likeness between the NPCs in Red Dead and the hosts in Westworld. They're both programmed to carry out these loops, right? Okay, so I'm going to try to make this quick because even though we're still working on getting video working.
Well, sorry, I'm not a video tech.
Yeah, is the video tech has left the room?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
He said 1200 by 800 or 1280 by 800.
And anything you try is not working?
Well, I mean, it's very small. And
Oh, we can just make it full screen. That's all right.
Okay.
I mean, the video's small?
No,
Try opening the video and then just make it full screen and see what happens. Command. Yeah.
Everybody can see that?
All right, that'll work.
We have no
Okay,
audio.
but
though,
we have no audio. Why don't we have audio?
because there's no hookup. Oh, here it is.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. All right, okay, so just hang on to it for a second. So would you roll it back to the beginning? Thanks. Okay. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us.
Find yourself in a bad dream.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Well, you can try.
Okay. So famously, Nolan and Joy both played Red Dead Redemption as well as GTA and BioShock in preparing to write the script for this. They claim that BioShock was more of an influence on their writing. I think that's probably true in some ways, the theme park aspect of Westworld, but I think that the look and feel of Red Dead Redemption is all over Westworld. And really quickly, I'm just going to kind of skip through some of this. The town of Sweetwater in Red Dead Redemption, in which the first town you start in, is the same name as the town in Once Upon a Time in the West. So it was a direct homage to Once Upon a Time in the West. In Westworld, the town is called sorry, am I getting this right? Yes, Sweetwater in Red Dead Redemption, Stillwater in Westworld, right? Which is also pretty close, and it's pretty clearly, and there are other homages throughout Westworld to Once Upon a Time in the West. So that film kind of connects the two other properties. The side quests in Red Dead Redemption resemble many of the missions that William and Langdon, what's his name? Langston? I can't remember now. His friend from business who he's competing with. The kind of the missions that they go on in Westworld are really reminiscent of Red Dead Redemption missions. In fact, there's one where they're, I think it's William and I can't remember who it is, that they go on kind of this mission where there's a military base and they're looking down from this cliffside and there's a mining entrance to a mine at the back of the canyon, and it's literally like a shot right out of one of the side quests in Red Dead Redemption. It's really strange how similar it is. And the freakiest one is just simply John Marston, right? And the character Teddy in Westworld's real name is James Marsden. That's kind of weird. They couldn't possibly have intended that, but it's pretty strange that's just a coincidence. But both of them, like I said, have troubling pasts, so there's this other connection. And I think that, to me, what struck me about both of them, and why I love playing Red Dead and why I love watching Westworld, is this whole concept of the loops of everyday life, and the way in which their redemption is basically to go off loop, right? And they keep talking in Westworld about he's off loop, so... And I think in Red Dead Redemption, you can experience going off loop just by literally running through the underbrush, and all kinds of stuff happens. All these side quests happen. You have to rescue people. You have to, you have to capture runaway prisoners and all kinds of stuff, right? So it's kind of like recreating your life by going off loop, essentially. So I made this short machinima. It's essentially, all the audio is from Westworld and all the visual is from Red Dead Redemption, and I'm trying to kind of express this whole thing maybe a little bit more poetically than I am right now. So let's watch that, and that's a volume control there, I guess? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to run this now, if you don't mind.
You find yourself in a bad dream. Close your eyes. Count backwards from 3. Wake yourself right up.
Do you remember?
you ever thought about whether this is really the life you want?
A lifetime of working hard, following the rules. Do you ever feel inconsistencies in your world? Or repetitions?
Imagining yourself breaking out of your modest little loop.
Stop. Lose all scripted responses. Improvisation only. He's off script. He's vectoring. He's off script. He's vectoring. We didn't program any of those behaviors. He's off script. He's vectoring. We didn't program any of those behaviors. He's off script. He's vectoring. We didn't program any of those behaviors.
We found the strain up here.
He's vectoring.
I don't think it got here by accident. It's as if he got an idea in his head.
Vectoring.
One that we never programmed.
Freeze all motor functions. Choices. Choices. You tell yourself you've been at the mercy of mine because it spares you consideration of your own. If you did consider your choices, you'd be confronted with a truth you could not comprehend. That no choice you ever made was your own.
Self is a kind of fiction. It's a story we tell ourselves. We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist. Humans fancy that there's something special about the way we perceive the world. And yet, we live in loops. As tight and as closed as the hosts do. Seldom questioning our choices. Content for the most part to be told what to do next.
Let's see where this path leads.
That's all. Were you guys able to hear any of that dialogue? Is it just really? Oh yeah. Okay. From back here, I can't hear any of it. Okay. So I'm going to pass it on to Tamara Yadao. She's going to hopefully introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tamara. Thanks, you guys, for coming and bearing with us on the technical stuff. So I'm going to actually talk about more a single concept, a single character, if you will. So my section of the talk is called Player Piano as NPC, right, or non-player character, or the non-player piano. So I'm going to talk about how the player piano in Westworld functions like an NPC in video games, and music's role as an early societal tool of memory. And also the idea of a host immortality in Westworld. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch on how mechanical music systems as art forms reflect humanity. Okay. So let's just close this up, if we could. So everybody's familiar with the player piano in in Westworld, right? So I'm not sure what you guys, think about these devices, but in a way, you really can think of them as sort of an early, form of robots, right? Because they are mechanical. Hold on, this didn't open in. Yeah, maybe so. And can you open this for me in Acrobat, please? Yeah, can you open it in Acrobat? My PDF file. Should be, but you're okay. You know what? I'm going to go off loop right now, and I'm just going to start talking about this stuff. So, essentially, in Westworld, the AI kind of the player piano sort of functions as a tool to awaken the hosts on some level. And the reason that I make this connection is because music, historically as a tool of memory, oral tradition, how folklore was passed down in Central Europe in the Middle Ages, essentially, is how people remembered stories about their communities and how they remembered their emotional connections to people, actually. And so in Westworld, in particular, the host Maeve seems to have this relationship, at least from a filmic standpoint of montage. The co-creators, Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan, put it together such that every time Maeve has an awakened moment, where she's either trying to remember one of her past lives where she was a mother instead of a madam in a brothel, these moments are connected with song in Westworld. Okay. And it's very interesting because one of the creators of Westworld, Lisa Joy, said that the player piano being put in this was sort of like the first way to primordially collect the hosts, sort of like a Rube Goldberg machine would, okay? Sort of like something sequential, that sort of triggers or activates something and something else that's within the scheme, okay? So in continuance, do you guys remember the fake plastic trees video at all?
Radiohead.
Yeah.
You mean the appearance?
I'm sorry, the appearance in Westworld. I'm looking for the video right now. That's why but for some reason, it's down here because it somehow got moved. Okay, so let's just look at this for a second. All kinds of problems here.
All right. That's good.
So while this player piano, like I was talking about, homages the history of robots, it plays an ally to her of sorts, like an NPC might, in passively affecting her along either in gameplay or through the narrative, right? So this experience of memory recall that the player piano triggers happens at least 2 more times, right? And I would say this ushers the host, and particularly Maeve, into Arnold's pyramid, okay, of consciousness. So everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? Bottom level memory, next step improvisation, next step self-interest, and then finally into suffering, which we find out in the final episode, right, from Ford, that's the key, is human suffering. The hosts need to know what they want in order to feel suffering, okay? So as Maeve goes through her daily loops, and she journeys further down the path of self-discovery with each subsequent rebirth, okay? So that's another thing, this notion of mortality. If she keeps dying, and there's a clip where she says, I've died 1,000 times, over and over again. It's sort of like she's beginning to realize that, hey, like nothing can really kill me. I'm here. So let's see if this is the correct. Yeah.
At first I thought you and the others were gods. And then I realized you're just men. And I know men. You think I'm scared of death? I've done it 1,000,000 times. I'm fucking great at it. How many times have you died? Because if you don't help me, I'll kill you.
So I think this is a really sort of powerful, this clip sort of brings it all together, this idea that memory has just really made her realize how fucking great and powerful she is, So it's a really interesting tool, I think, that society developed, and actually through, the practice of music. So coming back to that for a second, I just want to talk about, you guys obviously know some level of the history with that. Central Europe, I talked about the Middle Ages, Roman Catholic choirs singing Gregorian chant, to bards singing about fairy tales and Germanic legends, okay? And then this construct of filking sort of emerged in the 1950s, which you guys know what that is, right? So folk music circles with participants or fans that were making or singing songs that had science fiction, fantasy, horror themes, roughly. Okay, and though not exactly. So it's interesting because in a lot of ways, you could call MAGFest sort of like the sort of futuristic evolution of this notion. If you look around you, there are circles of music and communities happening all over the place, different music communities. It's fascinating, and just the way that everyone talks about different themes, game-related themes, but there are, again, science fiction, fantasy, and horror themes as well. But so the reason I brought this up is because I think that one of the things that we really love about music is that it helps us to understand who we are. So I'm going to read a quote from this French, social theorist, Jacques Attali, who said that if we look at one mirror, we only see an image of another. It is sounds and their arrangements that actually fashion societies and hold them together. So in this quote, I think he's really kind of holistically equating different constructs of society, whether it be theoretical, architectural, biological, or social, as reflections of ourselves, basically. And these are the same reflections that we can find in art and music, right? They're expressions from our minds. So with that, I'm just going to play, Thank you. The opening, a little piece of the opening. Now, I know you guys have probably seen this like a dozen times, but there's something in it that I think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting that the strings inside the piano that are fashioned by robots are made of the same material that the hosts are also made of, and also everything else, right? The horses and every other animate thing. And because this is really interesting to me, because I think that really points to this mirror notion I was talking about as in relationship to music, and also to the reflections within ourselves and what we want to see. And obviously the robots, the hosts are that for, Ford, and also for the people that come to Westworld. So I just want to read you something from Kurt Vonnegut's first novel, Player Piano, which is actually, there's a character in it who speaks out against this type of, mechanical evolution, who says, man is on Earth to create. He doesn't believe in this, by the way. Man is on Earth to create more durable and efficient images of himself, and hence to eliminate any justification at all for his own continued existence. So I think that's really fascinating, because within the context of how Ford, sort of orchestrates the liberation of the hosts, the player piano is key, no pun intended, but key to, kind of triggering the whole process of awakening. Okay, so I have to kind of finish up now, and we are almost there. But what I'm really getting to is this idea ultimately that, systems, that's what we're really seeing. We're mirroring, or Ford mirrors, and Arnold / Bernard, right? They mirror their own systems into, within the hosts that they create. And just in the same way that the player piano is a system, a much less sophisticated system, obviously, than a host or a human, but still a mechanical system that's made to be interpreted and programmed, right? And so just going back to Westworld, it's a really interesting notion, this idea that the player piano is sort of this passive thing, right? Because it actually becomes, do you guys know the piano wizard glitch in Westworld at all?
You mean
Thank you. See, I'm going to end with this, but I think it's a really interesting piece. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello there.
Well, hello there, little... Ah!
Yeah. So I think this is just really important to bring it full circle. But this idea that, in this awakening that happens with Maeve, each time she becomes more conscious, there's a death involved. And the piano is somehow, and the musical element is somehow related to this. So this is actually how I got this whole idea of this NPC notion. From watching Westworld and then this glitch, I was like, wow, that's amazing. So anyway, I'm going to stop so we can have Ken give his piece, and we'll have maybe a couple minutes for Q&A. Thanks.
Maybe.
Okay.
Which one?
Dazzle.
Dazzle Urbanite?
Yep.
Ken's going to open up with a video. Or not?
Just go ahead.
Yeah.
Now you tell me your story. What's a dazzling urbanite like you doing in a rustic setting like this?
Growing up, what I wanted to do with my life more than anything was to design and build robots. This was primarily inspired by my love for Voltron, Defender of the Universe, which I've well documented elsewhere. However, I pivoted when I was 12 to wishing to be a Disney Imagineer, the people who dream up the attractions at the theme parks. I could still build robots in that capacity, and the level of interactivity expected in the latter 80s was more realistic than the mile-high mechas that originally inspired me. When I was 15, I conceived of a theme park based around the idea of time travel, enamored as I was with the Back to the Future trilogy. In so doing, I actually planted the seeds of my eventual disaffection with the goal of becoming an Imagineer, as I was simultaneously aspiring to monuments to my creative genius to dwarf those mechas, while also realizing that an organization like Disney would never allow me primary credit for something on which they would stamp their name. I never conceived of a Western portion of said theme park because Disney already had Frontierland in the Magic Kingdom, which no doubt incepted Michael Crichton to create Westworld. In the original film, Westworld is one of 3 temporally themed parks, the others being Rome World and Future World. I did include the former period in my design, while Disney themselves even titled the industrial pavilions of Epcot Center Future World. As with most creative DNA, tribute or satire ends up feeding back into the collective unconscious from which commentary is absorbed and eventually remixed by that which is lionized or lampooned. The Ouroboros swallows its own tail. Indeed, it was after the original Westworld and Epcot, but before the rise of richly storied video games in the seminal book Hamlet on the Holodeck, where Janet H. Murray posited how a Western simulation could be constructed. Quote, a TV Western system, for example, might be able to run in Gunsmoke mode, Maverick mode, or Annie Oakley mode by varying the degree of violence allowed and the range of supporting characters and subplots. The same abstraction of a Western town might appear as three different fictional universes to different interactors, whose story preferences, as indicated by their first few choices perhaps, would dictate the appropriate mode of operation. For instance, a player who stepped up to the bar and ordered hard liquor while twirling his six-shooter might become involved in a Gunsmoke-style fight that would end in a citizen's death and the escape of the killer, whom the marshal would then be asked to track down. A player who dressed up fancy and sat down to gamble might experience a comic saloon fight and many opportunities to outsmart the aggressor and avoid a fight. A player who started with target practice and stopped outside the saloon to help an old man cross the street might be offered a saloon fight in which no one would get hurt, but the villains could be subdued by trick shooting. All of these scenes would have common elements, bad guy citizen insult challenge, from the generic Western fight frame, unquote. Coming from a family that never emigrated further west after making landfall in New York City, and born as the Western genre was in palpable decline, its charms were largely lost upon me. It was not until I was 15 on the very trip on which I conceived of the time travel theme park that I even laid eyes on this country beyond the mid-Atlantic seaboard. Naturally, much of what remained of the frontier, even when not recreated for the sake of tourism, was lost on my teenage fuckheadedness, but at least I finally had the vocabulary. When I got to college several years later, I introduced myself in what I could muster of the Western's purple prose and affected a black leather cowboy hat and duster. Why I thought that was germane to a liberal arts college in Wisconsin is lost to history. Perhaps this unspoken kinship was because, like me, the Western was actually born in the East, when the frontier began no further west than the Mississippi River, in the works of James Fenimore Cooper, author of Last of the Mohicans. And those works which followed his already began the cannibalization of the idiom, pale imitations with fantastic tales that commanded, "Go west, young manifest destiny." In Westworld, Maeve the Madam's story of choice is how the voice in her bicameral mind told her, this is the new world, and in this world you can be whoever the fuck you want. So too were the pioneers called to hitch up a wagon to the Oregon Trail despite the risk of dying of dysentery. Death they knew. Life, on the other hand, on their own terms, by the sweat of their brows and the proper narrative, could be whatever the fuck they wanted. Red Dead Redemption's John Marston is on a quest to overwrite his past, as the title suggests, while Westworld's Teddy's mysterious past is a mystery because up to a point it had never been written until long after the fact. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, as Aleister Crowley wrote, and in the Old West, that was more or less all the law there was. Robert Ford, co-founder and designer of Westworld, is himself a practitioner of the occult, as he states, everything in this world is magic except to the magician. However, when these new narratives conflict with what's already conceptual reality, they often lose. Ford's reveries and Sizemore's story adjustments cause supposedly erased data to surface and logic loops to cripple Westworld's operation. So too did the sins of the past catch up to the West, as the true depth of the depravity employed by settlers became more widely exposed. The romanticized bloom came off the rose. The former ideal of the frontiersman was laid bare as not the rugged individualist, but a blade in the thresher that tore up a paradise for the aims of an empire. What was held up as self-determinism was instead a massive depersonalization of no one more so than the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Reduced to little more than savages who didn't deserve the land as much as the white settlers, they were pushed to the margins, if not outrightly slaughtered in the millions. It's a matter of public record that Hitler based his genocides on the American model. As the past year has shown, this attitude is still the default of this country's power structure. In the same way, both Westworld and Red Dead Redemption also have natives who are treated as objectively. In the former, it's the androids who populate the park. In the latter, the non-player characters with whom one interacts to varying degrees. As creatures of man-made code, they are in fact literal objects, but as characters in literary contexts, they are meant to be sympathetic. Neither is entirely accurate. They occupy a neither realm we ought not take lightly. Their relative simplicity is not licensed to do what thou wilt, but instead approach them with enhanced caution on their own terms. In the case of the indigenous, we most certainly did not meet them halfway, and in so doing all but scrubbed a vibrant culture, or rather hundreds of them, from the face of the earth. And yet, in what scraps remain can be found a more insidious colonization, which to some might read as cultural appropriation. Yet the motifs and spirituality of the indigenous people infected white America, finding entry through our guilty consciences. The top-down hegemony of the Eurocentric narratives crumble as we speak, and a decentralized, naturally attuned awareness is ever rising, regardless of what the forked tongue-in-cheek would have us believe. So, we stray from the paths set out for us, in life as in sandbox video games, in the same way as Ford's androids drift towards chaos, in so doing listing towards a deeper, fuller grasp of our humanity. Certainly, this native New Yorker has an ever greater urge to roam, to break the cloister of the familiar and comfortable. As epistemology tells us, I don't know what I don't know until I know it. My assumption of the world may indeed be quite mistaken, as only empirical investigation through journeys forth may reveal. As Westworld's Dolores says, only by continued inquiry into oneself can the freedom the pioneers sought be achieved. As one travels further from one's safe space, the danger increases. But the Man in Black has a point when he says it is through suffering that one reaches one's truest self. We have inherited the ghost dance. In our stories that we enact, we walk with spirits, neither truly alive nor fully dead. We are blessed and cursed at once. There is no sunset into which to ride off, only the sea to say, this is as far as you go, now grow wings.
Okay, I don't know if we have time for Q&A. I guess we can go until someone comes in and tells us to stop. Does anybody have any questions? Any thoughts, comments about any of this? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry it was a little bit rushed. We had some issues. We got moved, our room got moved at the last minute. Ken Applebaum, Tamara Yadao, my name's Chris Burke. Thanks so much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.